Nobody's meant to see it. That's what I'm asking, so that before they all will feed up. Let me go find a talent. That's good. Next time I saw her right, not 5 minutes. Daniel. Daniel. So I feel like that's sitting there, sitting in the middle. Okay, they'll do presentation. I'm not standing up from here. Your own is to control the camera. You get that? And person sitting there will be standing up because this speaker will be exchanging it. Yeah, we need to take it to the panelists and then to the audience. For you. Not all of them. Who are just when it's 5 minutes time.
On this camera, it is fun and good. No.
You did that, guys. Share that, guys.
Is full. Now, what I want to know is, should I be the one recording from my side? Because if we lose you, will the recording stop?
Yes, you can also record from your head.
And where do I do that?
From your system.
Got it.
You have the access already.
And I am going to record to the cloud.
Yes, it's automatic.
Okay. Sorry to not know that. Okay, we're uploading ourselves to the cloud. All right, shall we start? We're waiting for Prof. Nduka Otiono, who will arrive. But in the meantime, I'm going to introduce you to the panel online. Please, can I ask for a disciplined room? Thank you. Please, can I ask for a disciplined room? Can we not have chatting? Let me introduce the speakers, please. I have assembled here for you a team of prize-winning authors and editors who have great experience in not only publishing, but also how to shape the field. And for each one of them, I've given some questions for which I want them to respond to and to give some guidance to prospective authors. I will introduce the panel. So the first speaker is Professor Nduka Otiono, whom you met yesterday. He will arrive, I am sure. The second speaker is Professor Sule Egya, who is an editorial board member of the Journal of African Literature Association, but a published author of creative work, a published author of many books and articles on a range of topics, but famous in particular for his work on eco-criticism. The second speaker is welcome, Professor Egya. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Joining from, where are you joining us from today?
I'm joining from Essen in Germany.
Thank you very much for being there.
Yep.
The second speaker I'm welcoming this morning is Professor Karen Barber, who's no stranger to Lagos Studies Association. She has attended many times. Have you attended many times? Once in person, many times online. Professor Barber is one of the leading scholars in the field of African popular cultural studies, but also very well known for her work on Yoruba and on Yoruba archives of all kinds. And so, Professor Barber, welcome to you, joining us this morning from Birmingham.
Yes, Birmingham.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Prof. And our third speaker is Professor Serawet Debele, on the editorial board of, I forget now what the journal is. Is it Religious Studies, Professor Debele?
Yes.
And also the most recent winner of the African Studies Association Queer Studies Colloquium or Queer Studies Sector, the winner of the Best Article Award. And I've invited her because of her work, her leading scholarship on the ethics of researching queer identities and queer lives. So, and has Professor Otiono arrived now? When he arrives, will you let me know? Yes, Dr. Olayiwola. Dr. Olayiwola, I am going to make you the host on the ground in case the electricity goes. I've sent you the questions. If the electricity goes, you please interview Professor Nduka Otiono on the ground. So now we are going to start, and I will ask each of the editors to say a few words, and I will ask a question, and then in response to the question, the editor will respond. I am going to start with Professor Karen Barber. So, Professor Barber, the question I have for you is, Many young Nigerian scholars, like scholars everywhere, want to publish an article that will make a global impact. And I want you to take us through a few of the ways in which one can write an article in Nigeria that someone in Boston or in London or in Birmingham could not write. So any thoughts you have that you can share with us? Thank you very much, Ma.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Hello. I used to be the editor of this journal, Africa, and I'm still the editor of one particular strand in the journal, which we have called the local intellectuals. Excuse me, the local intellectuals strand. It's not a very good label, but we couldn't think of a better one. And the reason we've called it local intellectuals, it's because it's about African thinkers who have produced texts. These could be oral texts, handwritten texts like diaries and letters, or printed texts like newspaper articles or pamphlets or books. But they've produced these thoughts to reflect upon issues in their lives and in their communities and their personal experiences. So they're creative producers of thought, but they're not academics. They're not people who've been trained in formal academic institutions, and they're not elites. So they're people who don't have international audiences. These are people who write because they have something interesting to say, or they want to keep track of their own lives, or they want to keep in touch with people that they're in communication with. So they produce notebooks, diaries, letters, local works of history, disquisitions on philosophy or literature, or performed or written poetry, newspaper serials, or any one other of a lot of different possible forms. And I could give you examples of the kind of texts we've published recently. I'll leave that to zoom into Carly's question, which is, what is that you, as if you're an African-based scholar, can do, which scholars based in America or Europe cannot do, and something that will be of great interest beyond Africa? Well, you can help to retrieve some of these precious, interesting works, which are an incredibly valuable seam of intellectual work, which has almost always gone unnoticed. Why? Because it's not the work of qualified academic researchers, but at the same time, it's not some kind of pure, unadulterated oral tradition. So it kind of falls between the two stools, and people have just ignored it. But it's massive. This kind of work has been produced for hundreds of years. So it constitutes an archive of local thought and experience and experiments and commentary, which shed a really interesting light on life on the ground in Africa, past and present. Now, these texts are very rarely accessible outside the context of their production. You can't go online and find these kind of texts. They're not available on the international media. So as scholars who are based in Africa and who know local communities intimately, those are the scholars who can identify the works of local intellectuals. You might have to go to see your grandmother, and you might have to ask, Grandma, what's in that box under your bed? And if your grandma is in a very good frame of mind, she'll pull out the box and open it, and you'll find a whole personal archive of things that she's collected, written and read and thought were interesting. and important. So what we do in the journal, do you want me to go on, Carly, or have you? Yeah? Okay. What we do in Africa, in this strand of local intellectuals, is we make space for the publication of such texts. Could be a very short text, or it could be a whole collection of texts, or it could be a really, really long text. The longest one we've published was 400 typescript pages of Akiga size history of the Tiv, in Tiv. We got the original text, which had never been previously published. And we had a team of translators who translated the whole text. So we put the whole English text and the whole Tiv text on the online journal. So in the printed journal, what we have is a short introduction by you, the scholar, who's acting as a mediator, kind of go-between. And then we have a sample of the local intellectual text, just a short sample to entice the reader. And then the reader is invited to go online and read the whole thing if they're interested, if they've been sufficiently enticed by your introduction. So what we're doing, in effect, is building up a kind of very eclectic archive of our own, which other scholars can visit and can reinterpret and compare with other things. But you are not the person who has to say the last word on it. You're a kind of mediator and a translator. If the text is in Yoruba, Swahili, Zulu, Chichewa, we've had texts in all those languages, then you will be the person who introduces the readership to those texts. So the great advantage of this is that, unlike questionnaires which you might go and distribute when you're doing your fieldwork, or unlike historical narratives that you as a researcher have sat down with your tape recorder and elicited by asking questions, these texts are what the people themselves thought were worth writing about. They're the things that they wanted to say in their own words, in their own formats and genres, not guided by any research interest, but just because that's what was going on in the community. And that makes them doubly valuable and precious to anyone who's interested in African culture and society. So I'll stop there. I think I've talked twice as much as you were hoping. And if you have further questions, I'm still here.
Thank you very much, Ma. And thank you also for showing us the kind of scholarship that cannot be done in Birmingham or Boston. For me, this is always at the heart of what Lagos Studies is trying to do. Because, you know, to try and write an article where the electricity and the Wi-Fi are not consistent is a different business from writing that article if you're sitting in a library where the lights are always on, the internet is pouring out all the time. So what is really important is to find that edge, to publish the kind of article that well-resourced scholar could never dream to publish. So then your location, I know, you know, you still have the infrastructural challenges, but your location and your language ability and your networks then become your strength. Thank you very much, Professor Barber. I'm now going to ask Professor Otiono, we can see you are in traffic. Please drive safely if you are driving yourself. So we're going to move on now. I'm going to ask. We'll see you when you arrive. I'm going to ask a different question now, and I'm going to ask a question to Professor Egya. And my question to you is the temptation to tailor one's research to chase funding. I want you to give us some some insights about the directions of eco-criticism, but also to talk to us about what the dangers are if you follow funding and just start writing things about eco-criticism because you think that's where the funding is going. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I should start by saying that the need for research in eco-criticism or environmental humanities generally is growing even more urgent, given the kind of environmental crisis that Africa is facing now. And also given the fact that we have the political terrain in Africa is one that, encourages what they call foreign direct investment, which often come in terms of extractive industrialization, oil and mineral mining, and this is going on currently in all parts of Africa. And these have negative consequences for our environments. And of course, we are already suffering from those. So there's a lot to do in that regard. And on the other hand, you have the international space where, as a scholar, as a student or a scholar, you need to operate across. So, and then you are in Africa also as a student or as a scholar, and you do not have resources for funding. I mean, for funding your research on ground. So you have to rely sometimes on foreign grants to be able to do your work, like I have done over the years. But then you have to be very careful about the choice of what you work on. I believe that as a scholar, and a Nigerian scholar for that matter of environmental humanities, you should do research from the position of acute awareness, of lived experience, of an intimacy with the object of your research. So I live in Nigeria. I travel frequently to do research. I am here in Essen writing a book, but this book is about Nigeria, and it is about something that concerns me in Nigeria, something that I live within, something that is within my immediate environment. And with environmental humanities, you have all of that, in Africa. So that is very important. And also, then when you are formulating your research questions, you are careful because that is where the problem comes. The funders, those who provide resources for you to do this research, want particular research questions or want you to tailor it to particular research perspective. But then you need to negotiate. And one of the ways you can overcome this is to be, while paying attention to what is required in the instructions, or for you to present a good proposal that will win an award, you have at the back of your mind that it is not all the objectives of your research that you probably have to make known to the funder. In other words, you might want to foreground those objectives that may please them. But of course, when you are facing your work, then you really need to know where you are going and what you are doing. So on the one hand, the funding is important for you to undertake this research. On the other hand, you do not want to end up with a research product that is useless to your immediate community. So you need to balance, and one way to balance is to foreground aspect of your objectives that the funder might be interested in, but also keep in mind that you are going to work, of course, whatever you are presenting for research is of course a proposal. Then when it comes to scholarly articles, there are also issues of editorial control and what the main objectives of the journal, are. So I will suggest that study a journal and know its main objective before you write to. In other words, you do not just send your paper to a particular journal because you are interested in publishing in Australia or in publishing in India or in publishing in Canada, but you need to study the main objectives, the goals of these journals, and that it can accommodate your own goals. So I know that there are journals that might be able to accommodate your own goals, and you can start from those aspects, from those journals. But as you grow stronger in the field, of course, it comes to a time that sometimes you can, write and send, and then your name perhaps might be what the journal may be interested in. So that is very important. And then I also think that as an environmental humanities scholar, we should learn to contextualize some of the received concepts that we have, because eco-criticism started, for instance, in North America, and then moved across the world, and then we have it in Africa. So some of the concepts like nature, animism, environmental justice, environmental conservation, the way they are used elsewhere might not apply to the way they are used in your own context. And you must be you must have that duty, you must have it at the back of your mind that it's very crucial that you contextualize each of these concepts. And let me end by pointing out just 4 areas that I think are very crucial to the new directions that we see in eco-criticism today. The first is climate change, and the questions that you should engage with should be, what do Africans think about climate change? How do Africans confront it? And what particularities should be taken into account in dealing with climate change? The second is extractivism, which of course has existed, but it's gaining. African eco-criticism started with extractive, the extractive subgenre, so to say, the Niger Delta and the response of literature to the Niger Delta. But it's taking a new dimension, because the idea of energy transition from bad to good energy, the way it is in the developed countries of the world, has some kind of a devastating cost for Africa. So while powerful nations of the world are talking of clean energy, solar stuff and all of that, the batteries, to sustain this clean energy is taken from the resources in Africa, and that has enabled a whole how do I put it? There's a kind of attention to the mining of cobalt, lithium, and whatever, which is currently going on in especially in Nigeria. And in my part of Nigeria, the central Nigeria, there are new companies Our government are going to Asia to say, we have this lithium here, come and exploit them and all of that. And that is becoming a very big problem for Africa. So these are issues that whoever is interested in extractive capitalism as reflected in eco-criticism or environmental humanities should look at. And then there's also the indigenous ecology, which is very important, indigenous ecology. So in what ways can we foreground and engage indigenous environmental practices? How may we, from an African perspective, confront the question that indigenous knowledge and practices are irrelevant to the scale of environmental crisis confronting the world today? And in what ways can indigenous environmental knowledge and practices be deployed to influence the attitude of Africans towards their biophysical environment? So it is now the case that we need to return to our indigenous archive. And in this case, we need to borrow from popular culture. I mean, like Professor Baba has just mentioned, we need to go to look at everyday activities, that go on around in our rural area and see those of them that are earth friendly, those ones that can help us, change our attitude towards the environment. And lastly, the colonial ecology, which is also an aspect that I would love to see more work on. And here, the kind of question we should ask are, what are the consequences of ignoring what Malcolm Ferdinand calls the colonial environmental double fracture of contemporary post-colonial society like Nigeria, How may we, in the context of neo-colonial forces underlying emergent extractive practices in Africa, emphasize the entanglement of colonialism and environmentalism? And how can we decongest environmental humanities of a pervasive, self-imposing Western epistemology to create a space for a fruitful convergence of indigenous environmental epistemologies from across the world, including Africa? So we need to look at how neo-colonial forces are themselves part of the problem we have when we deal with environment. So let me stop here.
Thank you very much, Professor Egya. I want to just lift out one of the statements you made and amplify it. And that is the question of producing scholarship that is from somewhere. There's little point in writing articles where you read it and you can't tell, is the person sitting in Boston, in Cairo? Where are they? But to write research that is embedded and makes sense of local knowledge and of, you can call it indigenous knowledge or you can call it popular cultural knowledge, but just knowledge that is from a place, because that is the thing that you can produce that someone who's in the nowhere place cannot produce. A second thing I want to emphasize that Professor Egya said is the resource poverty of Nigerian scholars and Nigerian universities is linked to the ecological crisis. These things are connected up.
They are connected.
They're not just separate things happening to us. So to think through how all of these things are linked is the kind of scholarship that is useful, like Professor Egya's own scholarship. Thank you very much, Prof, for that. We will come back to each of the speakers and you will have a chance to ask questions. I want to take this ethical question also of producing knowledge that is useful for those around us to Professor Debele. And the reason I invited Professor Debele is because there are so many articles being submitted now to journals on issues of queer identity in Nigeria. And many of, if not most of these articles are written by people who themselves are not members of the queer community. And for me, I identify that as an area that needs attention. And this is, in fact, one of the areas in which Professor Debele has produced leading scholarship. So I'm asking you, please, Prof, to say a few words to us about the relationship of the knowledge we produce and respectful engagement with the people about whom we are writing. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'm obviously the least experienced in this panel, and I'm humbled to be in conversation with all of you, and thank you, Carly, for inviting me. So talking about the question you raised, I want to begin from my own journey of what I did, how I started doing research on gender and sexuality, and particularly within the context of queer African studies. So it started with an observation where I was working at the library of the Institute of Ethiopian Studies in Addis Ababa, where I am from also, and there's hardly any discussion about queer communities in the country. And the few that speak about the subject, exactly like you said, written by heterosexual men, and arriving at very extremely problematic and dehumanizing conclusions. And then I thought, what else is being said elsewhere on the continent, for example, that I can draw on to kind of challenge this, or at least, if not challenging, at least introduce a couple of new questions through which we can begin to think about the Ethiopian context. So I started with that observation, that from the, grounding myself within the local, what's being said in Ethiopia. And then I went ahead and started looking at, that's okay, that my doorbell, sorry, my apologies, just 1 second.
Is Prof Otiono in the house?
Oh my God, sorry, it's doorbell and it wouldn't have stopped if I didn't run. Okay, so what was I saying? Yes, so I started with this observation of the local, what's going on, the discussion and the absence of it. But then I kind of also started looking at what's being said elsewhere, like in Kenya, South Africa, and other places on the continent where the discussion is more vibrant and more complex. And then I wanted to situate Ethiopia within that kind of more complex scholarship that's not simply dismissing the experience of queer people or representing it in a very problematic and humanizing way. And so that's how I started. And from there, my question of research ethics also takes off from that moment. And then I said to myself, so what matters community in my view, and a bit like the question of, is it ethical to study Africa? So then I started thinking, is it ethical to study queer Africa? And who can study queer Africa, or who can study queer Ethiopia? How can it be studied? And what kind of audience do we have in mind when we begin to write, when we begin to submit articles that we write? And so in anticipation of a certain kind of audience in mind, then how does our anticipation of a certain kind of audience shape the way we pose our research questions and the way we go about dealing with that question and the kind of conclusion we arrive at? And so it became very, very important to think about this tension between the audience we have in mind and the kind of question we want to engage and how we want to engage it, right? And so that's then when I asked this question of representation and how are we speaking about the community whose experience we don't necessarily understand, or we don't appreciate, or we don't really pay enough attention to, rather because we are thinking about the audience who might be interested in, okay, so queer studies has not been engaged in Ethiopia, who is going to read that research? It's not the question of what is my research going to do for the community or against the community, but who is my reader? How are they going to receive it? And what does that bring me in terms of visibility, in terms of attention, in terms of network and connection? And this is like very much embedded in that tension of scholars from the global south wanting to please or be visible to our colleagues in the global north. And then in that process, we also end up being research assistants or like a mouthpiece for because our theoretical orientation also comes from that, like because we have that audience in mind. What we mobilize for method and theory is also what's produced there. The framework is not developing from the context, from the experience, from the lived experience of the people that we want to think about. And so this is how I kind of arrived at where I am, and like I wrote that particular article that you spoke of. And so recently, this is also an observation that I share with you, Carly. Recently, I was reviewing a proposal submitted from somewhere for a certain research, fellowship granting community, and the proposal was outrageously problematic because I could see it was written by a cis heterosexual man who is also a pastor, and it says, I want in this, if I get the grant, I want to do research to help solve the problem of the LGBTQI plus community in this part of Africa. I'm not going to say, the country. And I could see it was very, very clear to me why that proposal was written. One, there is understanding that the community is a problem that needs to be solved. And two, there is an assumption that because queer studies or a discussion around the LGBTQ plus community is trendy now, it will automatically be accepted as long as this pastor comes from a place of goodwill of solving a certain social problem, and by gently presenting that problem, like it's not in a violent language. It's like, oh, we understand this community, we sympathize with the community, and we think that community can be helped, through the word of God or any other, discourse that might be mobilized to help the community. And so I thought, okay, so there is an attraction to us doing work on queer studies or on the LGBTQI plus community, because there is capital attached to it. Like there is a lot of money moving around. So on one hand, there is the poverty on the continent. On the other hand, there is some sort of activism going on in Africa that kind of creates a certain class of people, because money through activism and advocacy is coming, and that activism and advocacy, it's believed, has to be research-based. And what kind of research are we basing our activism and advocacy? And so then these are like the messy questions we need to be thinking about. And in the like just another final point, maybe I don't know if I've missed some points. I'm sure they'll come back in the discussion. But so there is an Ethiopian philosopher that I highly admire, and she says, we have to do research that concerns living and breathing Africans, and we have to be able to appreciate the experiences and the challenges of those living and breathing Africans, not really who we think can read our research and can invite us to the next conference or to the next fellowship. But while we need to think about that too, but we need to be able to strike the balance to be true to the living and breathing Africans whose experiences we draw on to do our writing or to do our research. I don't know if any of what I said is connected in any meaningful way to the question you asked, or even if there is a coherence in my statements, but I'll stop here for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much. I just want to draw a few strands there to emphasize again the importance of accountability to the people about whom we are doing research. This is a really crucial point that Professor Debele makes, that imagine the people about whom you are writing, reading it and finding value in it, so that we are not turning people into objects, but respectfully engaging. And in fact, this is something that I really admire with Asian scholarship. There's a respect for topics like, there's a respect for example, sex workers. There's a way in which people are written about as people, with respect, with dignity. And in some of the work that I see coming out of Nigeria on LGBTQ topics, I do not see that respect. I see othering, I see objectifying gaze. So to also think through one's ethical relationship to what you are researching, I think that picks up very well on some of the things that Professor Egya also spoke about. Thank you very much. I'm now going to move on to our fourth speaker, Professor Nduka Otiono, the editor of the Journal of Pan-African Wisdom, Nokoko. Thank you, sir, for your lively sharing yesterday of the session. I enjoyed very much attending. And the question that I want to ask to set you off, at the journal I work, I receive many articles, and they tend to be by young men. And they are articles about festivals with a sense of urgency about culture dying out. I think it's a very important topic, but a lot of the articles merely document. And I wonder, since this is a field in which you've published and you've thought about deeply, if you can give us some pointers how to write about the sense of wanting to preserve. Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you, Professor Koze. I hope I'm being heard. And then I would also like to thank LSA for giving me this opportunity and this platform to participate in this conversation. And I particularly would like to acknowledge Professor Karen Baba. I heard bits of her presentation, but it's somebody that I have admired a lot and whom I am very honored to say was the external examiner for my PhD over a decade ago. She is double chief in many ways, and I'm sure some of you who know her reputation would also realize that. And then I also would like to acknowledge my colleague Sarah Widebele, and of course, Sulegia. The panel, as it's constituted, speaks volumes, in terms of the generation that it covers, and at the same time, about the scholars and their temperament. And I think this is quite a historic gathering, and I feel honored to be part of that. Having said that, before I get into the immediate question that you asked, which I will get to very quickly, I wanted to segue, into some of the earlier conversations that, have been had, of which you actually wrap up, about accountability to the people we are researching. And I think this is where the everyday epistemes, matter. How what we study about the everyday comes into the picture, but more importantly, about the ongoing sensitivity about decolonizing knowledge. And then also about, and I feel we should also decolonize the journals. And in order to answer satisfactorily from my perspective, the point that you make about, say, Nokoko, I will see how as a point of intervention that Nokoko operates. both in terms of redefining knowledge from the continent and then also providing a platform for emerging scholars, which many of the journals tend not to emphasize. So there is that gap that we try to fill and that we try to promote. So in decolonizing journals, there's a point that you made earlier, Carly, about accessibility, about the conditions for the production of knowledge, say in a country like Nigeria. And if we needed any illustration of that, it best happened yesterday during the Zoom meeting that we had. That was just continually interrupted by logistics, which is not to say that there are no logistical challenges in the best parts of the world with technology. Technology is always a devil, as it were, but also a saint, in many ways, if you know what I mean. And so we had to find ways to ad-lib, to improvise. And this is also the kind of environment in which scholars in this part of the world operate. And I'm happy that, Carly, you highlighted it. It's very important to underscore that. I also experienced that, and I lived it out this morning with the challenges I had getting here, which is a different story, another short story on its own, as a matter of fact. But as we have this conversation, I would like us to see ways in which, in representations of the knowledge systems and also the knowledge culture and environment under which we write, that we think about what is going on in Kenya at the moment. Yesterday, 5 youths were killed as part of a very protest that is seen to be one of the worst or one of the best in Kenyan history. And this is still ongoing. So what kind of knowledges do we produce in environments that are so fraught with tension, that are so fraught with conflict, and are also fraught with very basic logistical challenges, where to get energy to write is not just about depending on a power supply system, but also on generating your own electricity in a country where the price of petroleum or the price of fuel or gas is no longer affordable. So scholars have to generate electricity. They have to generate different forms of activities to even enable them to meet the very basic needs. And they have deadlines with journals. I decided to pitch my conversation this way, realizing not just the target of the LSA, but also of the group here in the House, to whom I think I would like to speak directly. So in doing research, it's very important that we do research that matters, one that is ethical, but also as editors that sometimes without necessarily compromising standards, that we think of ways that we can stretch to the barest minimum the kind of accommodation that we can provide. For example, I have a scholar who researches a masquerade, a mask here, going back to the representation of culture to which you asked me. And then the scholar has to deal with issues of field work, having to observe, go to a field, sometimes extremely dangerous. As part of my work in Lagos, I have been shot point blank, and I just managed to survive that, while I was a journalist. And so when you deal with this scholar going to the field, or in my own case, researching street stories, going to Ikeja bus stop to talk to people, to gather data, what kind of responsibilities do you owe? In what ways do you have to deal with the ethics of this research, as well as a very existential part of the research that you're doing that enables you to survive the research to tell the story? In other words, to live to tell the story, to live to write the research. And so part of this challenge is dealt with from some of the scholars that I talk with through armchair research on matters that otherwise required field work. And so part of what you'll be looking at is how do these scholars approximate the best practices in line with the challenges that they face. And so I have also encountered this experience that you have provided, where in expectations of people engaging, very robustly with these ideas, more or less just tease the surfaces, as it were. I will not provide any excuse for any scholar who fails to do due diligence, which is required, because journals and articles go through peer review process, and there is no IM in it. So by IM is, some kind of knowing somebody, which is a Nigerian subculture that facilitates, some kind of special consideration. In other words, these articles are assessed fairly and on their own merit. And so in trying to meet that, how do we as journal publishers and as editors recognize the the tyranny of Western knowledge production that makes references, for example, bibliography by a scholar from Nigeria produce work that is mainly filled with localized scholars. And I think some of you who are editors may have had to deal with it. So we are looking for global scholars, which are important, but because some of these scholars have no access to the kind of libraries which Tali had suggested early on, do not have access to the kind of research advantage that we have, are able to use the resources, the local resources, to produce work that just by barely looking at the work cited or the bibliography looks so limited. And so getting even closer to the idea of production of culture, I think now most of us through globalization have become fast food scholars, you know, in which case some of the materials are not fully digested. And so in writing about these cultural experiences, in some cases, people are just basically recounting what exists in the public domain. And this is a big issue. And I am happy that you brought this up because there cannot be enough engagement about the need to write more robustly. So in working in street stories and then in oral literature, I have dealt with storytellers, for example. Let me use that example, who produce work that were ahead of their time, not necessarily ahead of their time. I mean, like in terms of the discourses that we do. The storyteller that I have studied, you know, is a man called Nweke Moma. And this is a storyteller from Ubuluku in Delta State, which is the Igbo-speaking part of Nigeria, where the Delta Igbo-speaking part of Nigeria, where I come from. And as far back as the 60s, this man used to dress as a woman. He was a cross-dresser. So he performed in a cross-dress format. He would come dressed like a woman and hide amongst women who are the accompanists. And he told me stories about how he enjoyed people looking for him, trying to identify whether he had come for a performance. And there he was camouflaged amongst the women accompanists in the production group. And so in dealing with, you know, such an artist who was also a court historian and so many other things associated with storytellers, one needed to engage, you know, with this scholar, especially under contemporary times, with the contemporary scholarships, as it were, but at the same time recognizing the traditional modes that he also embodied. And I think this is so important. So yes, I do agree that some of the discussions that I see, you know, say we had a special issue of, in a different journal, African Literature Today, on African literature and in African languages. And the surprising thing was that there were very lean submissions for it. In spite of our efforts to draw in more submissions, it looked like that was an area that scholars were quite interested in, contrary to expectation, you would say, in order to deal with this. So I know that I've been talking for quite a while, and I arrived at the party late, and I don't want to take up all the time, but I'll be happy to tease out a whole lot more of the points that I make. But as a way of closing my initial presentation, I wanted to draw attention to this book. The title is Africa Matters: Cultural Politics, Political Economies, and Grammars of Protests, edited by Pius Adesomi and Blair Rutherford. This book is a selection of some of the best articles published in Nokoko. And the idea is that the journal should not exist only online, and is a free access, you know, is an open access journal. And we have resisted attempts to make it, to put some kind of gates, or what do you call it now, you know, some of those pay walls to it. That's also another conversation that could be had on a different panel. What is the politics of paywalls and accessibility of academic articles, sometimes, you know, by authors of such articles? And this is one of those ways that we have tried to reach out. Although this is sold, but the idea is that we recognize that scholars around the world, especially in the disadvantaged part of the world, may not have had access, even if it's free online. And so being able to distribute this as best we can meant they had additional opportunity to gain access to this book, which is a collection of essays from Nokoko. And I would like to pause at this point.
Thank you very much, Prof. And can I ask, is that a Bookcraft publication, or who published that?
This is actually published by Daraja Press. So Daraja Press is run by our friend, sorry, I just missed his name right now.
No problem.
The founding publisher of of Pambazuka? Can somebody remind me of his name now? Daraja Press. Okay. Firoz Manji. Firoz Manji. Firoz Manji, after Pambazuka, has founded Daraja Press. And now that you asked me this question, I think it's one press that we should look at, because he also publishes a lot on social movements and on ideologically inclined books. So this is published by Daraja Press, which fits into the ideology of the press itself on publishing marginal knowledge production.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. I want to just question that word marginal. Who is the margin? Who's the center? For whom is the margin the margin? You know, if you sitting in a room like Lagos Studies Association, is that the margin or is that the center? From where I'm looking, it's a kind of center, a center of knowledge production. But you know, that's just an aside comment. Thank you very much. I now want to move to a second small part, and I'm trying to get hold of Felix Agiola. Do any of the pilots, the tech people know? I know Felix works hard for the conference. Do you know if he's around? The reason I want Felix in the room is in this next session, I want each person, each of these editors and authors here to say a few words about their dream article. And my most recent dream article is by Dr. Agiola. But let us, so each one of you, if you can pitch the article you would like to read, that you would like to receive on your desk, give us inspiration, give us wings, tell us what it is you would like to read. So, Professor Barber, may I start with you, Ma?
Well, you may, but my answer will not be what you hoped. You gave us a hint beforehand that you might ask us about our dream article. And at first I was really excited. I thought, yeah, here I can imagine what I would really, really like. And then when I thought about it, the local intellectuals' contributions are so diverse. They're so different from each other that if I describe one as the ideal that I would really want, it's as if I'm saying you're not really interested in all the others. So that gave me a problem. And then I thought, just this morning, I had a brainwave. I thought, why don't I say that my dream article would actually be a whole tin trunk that people keep under their beds full of their archived materials. And then you could have a whole special issue devoted not only to the individual items, which could be a diary, a bundle of letters, could be a local history, could be a collection of proverbs, could be recipes, all those kind of things that people collect, newspaper cuttings. But we could then explore the relations between them. What is the biography of this tin trunk? What are the connections between it? And what does that tell you about people's intellectual networks, environments, and exchanges through their lives? So that's what I will do. I will make a virtual tin trunk.
Wonderful. So a treasure chest of documents, artifacts. Thank you. I hope you find that tin trunk. Can I ask Professor Egya, you don't have to have such a dream, but if you could commission, if there was an article you would love to read, what would it be?
Okay, so let me also give some kind of a hypothetical response. So for me, a dream article will be an article that as a post-colonial eco-criticism scholar, I would be interested in an article that deals with the post-colonial text, whether it be the written text, film, or any aspect of popular culture. And then I would want to see my article or this article in this structure. 1, introduction. And here, I want to see how the writer introduces the work, I mean, the article, the study, to attract me as an audience. And moving to the objective of the article, the significance, very important, contribution to knowledge, and also the positionality of the writer. For me, to do an eco-critical study is to do some form of advocacy, is to take some advocacy step, and the positionality of the writer is also very crucial. And then the next step will be theoretical and conceptual framework. I want to see a very solid theoretical and conceptual framework, which is usually what I do not see in articles by younger, scholars today, maybe because of what Professor Otieno has said. They are faced with a lot of problems, especially that have to do with accessing material. But also, even with the lean material resources you have, I want to see a theoretical framework that does not necessarily rely on other people's view, but also project your own view, your own use, contextualization of the concept that you are deploying, the theory, the concept you are using. How do you conceptualize them? In what sense are you using them? So people will start writing article, and under theoretical framework, they start defining eco-criticism. I mean, so that for me will be needless. But what do you want to do with eco-criticism, the theories, and also recognize that there are many theories, there are many concepts. Select what you want and which is applicable to your study, and make a meaning out of it in the way that it will shed light on the kind of analysis you will do. So that is very, very important. And then you move from that to the analysis. So in eco-criticism, we emphasize on the analysis. I mean, the theoretical context is just to be a basis for your analysis. The point at which you are expected to disseminate some new knowledge is at the point of analysis. And at this point, I would expect an article to give me something fresh and refreshing, So, and in this context, it does not matter whether the text had been engaged before or it is a new text. And I do not also want a situation where the text, the writer just keeps regurgitating by quoting what other people have said about the text. I am more interested in seeing the new thing that the writer is bringing out from the text. And I am fascinated by cross-generic studies, but not one that is superficial or superficial. I am attracted to analysis that is deep, what is called close reading, or in anthropological study, they call thick description. So you need to describe and then bring out what you want to do in your analysis. And then I want to see a conclusion where you summarize your very significant point, those things that you want the reader to take away from you. So this will basically be the structure of my dream article. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Prof. Egya. You've given us a recipe for what it should look like. Dr. Felix is in the house, and I know he's a very busy man. He's one of the people who's building LSA for us every day, brick by brick. And I want to just appreciate you, Dr. Felix, for your article, which is in the final stages. So I will describe the wonderful article to you, and you will see why it's my current dream article. Then we can applaud Dr. Felix, and then he can go. So Dr. Felix Agiola has written the most wonderful article, and what he has done is to write about the difficulties of doing the research that he did for his PhD at the crossroads between police regulations, the gangs and the area boys and their rules for how to live, and the university's code of ethics for research. So it's not just an article about this is what happens, this describing. It's an article that reflects on how he tried to access the knowledge, what the blockages were, how he had to triangulate between these different rules to come up with his research. He doesn't have time at the moment to do the final revisions. He will do them for me when the conference is finished, and then the article will be published, and it will be fantastic. So please, can everyone just appreciate him? Congratulations. Thank you, Dr. Felix. And now, if you want to say a word, you can. Otherwise, actually, yes. Can you tell us a word about how long it took you to write this article?
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, this article is an ethnographic investigation into street hawking, pickpocketing, and youth gangs in Lagos. So it's a very, very complicated study, and it was quite difficult conducting this kind of research in Nigeria due to several factors. You have to traverse between various codes, the ethical codes of the university, because for an ethnographic research of this dimension, dealing with human subject, people's identity, people's profiles are involved. You have to also deal with cultural values, which must not be infringed upon. And there are also the codes of the police and the state government, the government, which doesn't allow some exposure of certain information without obtaining relevant permission from the relevant authorities. And so, of course, there's also the codes of the street gangs. So it is not a research that anyone could this is not an archival research. It is not a desk research. So it is a research that involves going into the terrain, the domain of the gangs. So what I did is I had to adopt an immersive approach in which I combined my own experience as an itinerant hawker in the traffic in the 1980s, all right, in Lagos. During the 1980s, after the adoption of the structural adjustment program, I was a victim of what Sarah Berry called disappearing livelihoods. My parents lost their job. So I obtained some experiences as a street hawker, hawking ice water in traffic in Lagos. So that was the basis of my research. So, of course, the motivation for the research was fueled by official categorization, the stereotypes against street hawkers by government, and also with day-to-day understanding of the activities and crime associated with street hawking. So, but I needed to differentiate to analyze these facts, and it was necessary for you to really know where to go to. So, growing up in Lagos, trading in the traffic, so I knew in the 1990s, street hawking was quite associated with criminality. We know that. So most of the guys who opt in Lagos, they usually come from the rural ghettos, and I knew some of this terrain. So growing up as a researcher, I needed to do this kind of research, but I would need to immerse myself into the milieu, the social context of these guys, and I had to be I have to I don't know how to it's permissive to say that I have to do everything the youth gangs. I have to associate with various gangs in Lagos, the courts guys. So it was not difficult. One of my students, Ludovic, accompanied me at the point. So I have to move into the terrain of the gangs, either Aye, the Alora, the Black Axe, and various local other courts at the rural environment. I blended with them. We ate together. I slept. We went to Brutel together. I smoked canna occasionally, Refino, Apology, Canadian Loud, Colorado, and National. All right, so it's this is so one of I spoke about the codes of the university. There's the codes of the university, there's the codes of the police, but there's also the codes of the street gangs. Before you could gain acceptability into this terrain, at the point conducting research was fraught with a lot of risk in terms that I was scared about cases, incidents of police intrusion into those gangs, shooting and all of that. Of course, even though I had obtained permissions from the police, from the commissioner of police in Lagos, but of course, police would always come into all of those stores, hideouts, to go to brotels, because one of the critical components or features of street gangs is that after the daily exploration of the street in the traffic, the end result of the day's enterprise will end in the hangouts, drinking, smoking, and of course the brotels where the lavish or the proceed all of that. So it was quite difficult conducting this kind of research, but you have to do that. I adopted what I described multiple identity, and of course I have to reflect in the title. So on the one side, I am an academic, a scholar trying to unravel a complex phenomenon. On the other side, if you probably met me in the traffic, I'm a street gang. So in most cases, conducting the research, I had to understudy. I sold myself to the gangs in most cases as a frustrated Nigerian graduate who was probably looking for a job and trying to learn the antics of pickpocketing in the traffic. So in most cases.
Thank you, Dr. Felix. Dr. Felix, wonderful. Now you've all seen what do you call it when you see the trailer for the Nollywood movie? Coming soon to a screen near you. Thank you. It's not only brave research, it's brilliant research and super smart analysis of how it all fits together. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Dr. Felix. May you be Professor soon. Thank you for coming to talk to us, and now you can carry on running the conference for us. Thank you, sir. You can see why I wanted Dr. Felix to come, because you can see the originality of his approach is something. Okay, I also think it's very male scholarship. I don't think a woman could have written that article, that spaces he accessed, but you can see how he was generating knowledge from what he knows and from experience. I'm now going to, do you need my attention, driver, pilot? No? We're not at question time yet. I'm just going to ask Professor Debele now to please, if you want, you don't have to describe your dream article, but if you want to, this would be your moment.
Oh, I think Felix's article looks like that dream article that we all have in mind. But so one observation I make within queer studies is the tendency to make the research agenda within queer studies as if it's an isolated something, a self-contained something that can be studied on its own terms. My dream article would be something that situates queer stories and experiences within the broader context, because it's not an isolated incident. It's connected to global capitalism. It's connected to our local histories. So while respecting the local specificities, I think that dream article for me would be something that also accounts for to what this is connected. towards socio-cultural, political, and especially political, because there is a tendency to depoliticize queer studies and the subject of queer identities. But it's a very political project. I remember even in Nigeria during EndSARS, there were queer Nigerians writing themselves into that moment. And so I was thinking that EndSARS is very much also connected to other lives and other experiences apart from specifically ending the demand to end SARS, right? So my dream article would be something that shows these local connections, these structural issues, but the global as well, how major mega religious institutions come to the continent and set agenda, and how that cannot be analyzed outside of how queer studies cannot be analyzed outside of this global conditions in which we find ourselves. So that will be just while seconding what everyone said.
Thank you very much. And I can hear how that is similar to also what Professor Egya said about connecting the super local. So the article must look inward for the super local and outward to see how it connects up to other issues.
And the article has to also be daring enough to theorize, not just draw on what Michel Foucault has said many, many years ago,
yes,
but draw theory from the local and be courageous enough to say what needs to be said.
Thank you very much. Sometimes I will say to an author, your article is good, but it's too well behaved.
Yes.
It's just too straightforward.
Exactly. It's that courage on.
Now, I think we come to the moment when I'm going to hand over the microphone to my young colleague, Dr. Olayiwola. I don't think it's very easy to manage questions from the cloud. So I'm going to ask you to chair now, and Dr. Otiono, for you to be our anchor. And those of us here sitting on the cloud, we're just going to be here, but you two run the room now. We've been very lucky with the electricity and the internet.
So
thank you, Prof. Thank you, Dr. Olay. We can take questions from the floor.
Yeah, I think our colleagues are muted. We can't hear what Otiono is saying.
The microphone has been touched. It doesn't like to be touched.
Unmuted. I don't see that the microphone is cancelled. Maybe somewhere there. Hello, can you hear me now? All right. I just wanted to take a moment to respond to that last part of what the ideal article is. And I would move from the last point that you make, that sometimes the articles are well behaved. For me, the sense of an ideal article is very problematic, and I don't have an ideal article, partly because my work is at the intersection of journalism. I started my career as a journalist, and then I'm a creative writer and also a scholar. And I try to control this affecting the way I look at articles, because it means I have some expectations. But the most important thing for me is that the article has to make some significant contribution to knowledge, or at least a level of contribution to knowledge. And then it also should attempt to disrupt some traditional approaches to article writing. And Moses Ochuno, our colleague, has gotten into trouble for his critique of the traditional thematic framework approach. So I look for a freshness to the approaching the issues. And then I'll just leave it at that, because it's a huge topic, and let others continue with the questions that they want to ask. So you just raise your hand, and you're going to move this. Oh, this is not plugged. Do they have to come to the front to speak? So let's take, we have about 10 minutes. And then I would ask you to ask a question, or if you have a comment, as much as possible, do not exceed 1 minute. That looks tyrannical, but I want to see that we give as many people as possible a chance. And then we'll take 4 questions only, so that we can give opportunity for the panelists to respond as much as possible. So we have 4 people already, and then we'll just go with them, and then we'll have the responses. And if we have more time, we'll take more questions. And I would also put the panelists to the same kind of structure of time. Yes, go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for the seminar. So my question is, I'm an undergraduate.
Can you hear him?
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Raise your voice because of the people in the
Okay, I am an undergraduate studying history in University of Ilorin. So, and I've written few academic papers about history, and one I'm even working on is about the spiritual belief of Kaba people in Kogi State between 1940 to 2015. So, I want to ask, what advice would you give me as an undergraduate in putting myself out to the world, in publishing my books on those online journals, and also applying for the grant research? So how do you think I should go about it? How do you think I should put myself out to the world? Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Please, panelists, take note of the questions so that you can choose to respond.
So can I have Dr. Olayiwola chairing now? Dr. Olayiwola, can you chair?
Good morning, Professor Kali and the rest of the panelists. My name is Dr. Mujida Abdulalim from Ahmadu Bello University. My question and comment is the process of research and the learning is now hybrid. It has been adapted. I mean, when I mean by adaptation, I mean a lot of text is not text as in text sound anymore. It's moved into ebooks, it's moved into electronic games. So are we considering this kind of things in our editing and journal productions? Because content and text is now hybrid. The process itself has changed. The text itself, that is the content itself, has changed. I don't know if you get my question. So as editors, that's it. As editors, are we putting into consideration that text, as in the text itself, has been adapted? It's changed. It's no more text. It's now multidisciplinary. It's connected to so many other things. So when we are editing, are we still editing text in the traditional form of text? Or do we understand that we are now living in an hybrid processed education and learning, and our editing also should be affected by that? Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, panelists, for that wonderful session. I'm Mariam Salaudin from Osun State University. I actually have a question directed to Prof here. You talked about access to materials and how it is increasingly becoming difficult, especially for us, and especially for upcoming scholars like us. How do you think we can bridge this kind of gap to make research here essentially easier? Because I've had issues with this kind of thing. I think even our local scholars now publish abroad, and you hardly find their works, even in Nigerian bookshops. You have to order and ship them in. I think I had that issue with one of Professor Suleyegia's books, Nature and Aesthetics, something like that related to eco-criticism. I have a second one, please. It's directed to Professor Suleyegia. Is it sufficient to rely on theories or ideas generated by earlier scholars when analyzing your text, either literary or film text, or you must actually have something entirely different to say about this? These are my two questions. Thank you.
Yeah. All right, thank you for this opportunity. My name is Peter Oluwasomi from King's University, Osun State. My question is actually, I wanted to ask a question about what ID paper should look like. I think somebody has asked that question. But my own point of concern is the fact that, for instance, sometimes I put a paper out there and then at the end of this, it came back rejected. Then when I look at the comment are just maybe to do some minor corrections and all this. So I have this concern that why is it not that the papers is being accepted and then maybe you ask me to do the correction, either it is minor or major. So please, what does a publisher look for in order to make a minor or major correction? So at least I know that will help somebody like me at least to put out a good paper, because I'm not really happy when I put up a paper, I use all my energy, gone the midnight, palm oil and all this, and then at the end of the day, paper just come back and rejected. So it's always very painful. So what are the ideal things that you look out for, either to say, okay, make this minor or major correction? Then the second question is,
does advocacy research have a place in academic publishing? Because sometimes we want to do advocacy, but some people say it has not been done before, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Brighton Joko, and my question is about mentorship. Recently, I sent my work to a group of editors, and out of about 5, only 1 responded. And Professor Kali, she responded, and the comments she made, made me learn things I have never learned about writing abstract and other things. So I want to ask, in as much as we know how busy you are, do you make out time for mentoring? Reaching out to people who send mails about researching and the other things. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ilupeju Terika. So I have 2 major issues. My first question goes, how do you globalize indigenous cultural values, especially those when you're writing about festivals and that are restricted within a locality, and you're writing for an international journal? So how do you globalize that? Then the second question is, we write for academic journals and we try to solve problems in the society. At the end of the day, the people we are profoundly solution for do not have access to this information. Is there going to be a bridge between the society, a connection between the society and the masses in the future, or will just be writing for academic journals, for academics alone?
Please, okay, so let's take response from the panelists online. Now that we are lucky to have a good connectivity. So we'll take your response, then we'll come back to the room.
So we just have 3 minutes left. I'm just going to answer very quickly to the question about mentorship. So I'm an editor with 3 day jobs, and on top of that, I'm an editor. So the quality of mentorship that editors like myself can give comes from the extra time they steal from their families, and in the evenings, have realistic expectations. Professor Otiono is there with you at the conference. I encourage you to ask him to sit with him at lunchtime. He will also be busy with many. I can't see his face now. Maybe he doesn't like what I'm saying. But he's a very generous man. See if you can speak to him, but be realistic about what editors can give you. The kind of testimonies that writers can give you is this: there is a secret to getting published, and it's just reading, and hard work. So I think I'm going to, yes.
We've just been told that we can extend for 10 minutes, so I'm not sure what you want to do with that 10 minutes.
Well, so I have to be at the next panel again, so I have to sort of prepare myself again for the next one. I mean, the questions that people ask are really good questions, but they're very specific. So I don't think we can let a whole room listen to extremely specific answers to extremely specific questions. So I don't know if anyone online has a final word that you would like to say. One of the editors online, Professor Egya, Professor Barber, Professor Debele.
Take the 10 minutes.
Okay. Should I say something?
only if you want to. I mean, we have a few minutes left. So if
Yeah,
you
so
don't,
I want to say to the audience that I am open to mentorship, and of course you can reach me via my email. But I am open to mentorship as much as I can. So that's just the information I want to give. So if we cannot interact now, you can get across online.
I want to quickly second that offer to, if there is anything that you think I can offer, reach out to me as well.
thank you very much. Thank you, both of you. So I think what I'm going to do, I'm going to draw the online component to a close, and then the live room can carry on. And if Prof. Otiono wants to carry on, but is this room 401?
301.
301, okay. Because the Women's Mentoring Network are gathering now in room 401, and I have to be there. And Dr. Ola, I'd love it if you were there to be on the ground. But let me say thank you to the online speakers for coming, and then the online speakers can go and you can carry on your live conversation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And Professor Otiono.
Bye.
Okay, so while oh, okay. So while I'll take two questions from the general questions, and then one of them is about text, which I find very important.